Imagine standing on the edge of a battlefield. The air thick with tension. Swords clatter, shouts echo, and chaos swirls like a storm. Yet in the middle of it all, one warrior stands still calm, unshaken, silent. His strength isn't in his blade or his armor. It's in his mind. His silence isn't weakness, it's power. That's the Stoic way, finding strength without needing to shout about it. Today, we're diving into a story that brings this idea to life. The warrior's silence, strength without words. This is a tale of courage, control, and the kind of quiet power that changes everything. So, grab a coffee, settle in, and let's explore what it really means to be strong. Welcome to the Daily Stoic Mindset. The sun was barely creeping over the horizon when Marcus set out from his village. A young man of 22. He wasn't tall or broad-shouldered like the heroes in the tales his mother used to tell. His hands were calloused from working the fields, not from wielding a sword. But there was something about Marcus, something in his steady gaze. The way he moved with purpose, like he carried a secret no one else could see. Marcus lived in a time of unrest, in a land where warlords clashed over scraps of power, and villages like his were caught in the crossfire. His people were tired, their spirits worn thin by years of loss. Yet Marcus didn't complain. He didn't curse the heavens or shake his fist at fate. He'd learned early on that shouting at the wind doesn't make it stop blowing. Instead, he listened, he watched, he thought. One crisp morning, word spread that a warlord named Cassian was marching toward their valley. Cassian was a brute of a man, they said, with a voice that could shatter stone and an army that left only ashes in its wake. The village elders gathered, their faces pale as they debated what to do. Some called for surrender, others for a desperate stand. Voices rose, arguments flared, and panic seeped into the room like damp rot. Marcus sat quietly at the edge of the meeting, carving a small piece of wood with his knife. His silence wasn't noticed at first. People were too busy shouting over each other. But then old Livia, the village storyteller, caught his eye. "What say you, Marcus?" she asked, her voice cutting through the noise like a bell. The room turned to him. Marcus didn't stand or raise his voice. He set down the wood and said simply, "Fear won't stop Cassian, neither will noise. We need a plan." His words landed like stones in a still pond. They weren't loud, but they carried weight. The elders blinked, caught off guard by the calm in his voice. A plan? No one had spoken of plans, only despair or defiance. But Marcus wasn't interested in either. He'd been reading the works of a philosopher named Seneca. Scraps of parchment he'd traded a bushel of grain for at the market. Seneca wrote about controlling what you could and letting go of what you couldn't. To Marcus, that made sense. Cassian's army was coming whether they liked it or not. The question was what they could do about it. "Speak, then," said Livia, leaning forward. "What's your plan?" Marcus took a breath. "We don't have the men to fight Cassian head on," he said, "but we have the land, the river, the hills, the narrow pass. We can use them, not to win a battle, but to avoid one." The room stirred. Avoid a battle? It sounded like cowardice to some. But Marcus wasn't swayed by their murmurs. He explained his idea. Divert the river to flood the pass, making it impossible for Cassian's army to cross without losing days of travel. Days they couldn't afford. With winter closing in, it wasn't glamorous, no swords raised, no banners flying, but it was practical. It was stoic. The elders hesitated, but Livia nodded. "Let's hear him out," she said, and so they did. For the next 2 days, Marcus worked alongside the villagers, digging channels to guide the river. He didn't bark orders or demand attention. He showed up, worked hard, and answered questions with quiet clarity. When others grew frustrated when the ground was too hard or the water too stubborn, Marcus kept going. "Focus on the shovel," he'd say. "The river will do the rest." It wasn't just about the task. Marcus was teaching them something deeper. Control your effort, not your outcome. That was straight out of Epictetus, another philosopher whose words Marcus carried like a shield. "You have power over your mind," Epictetus wrote, "not outside events." Marcus didn't need to say it aloud. He lived it. By the third day, the channels were ready. The villagers gathered at dusk, watching as the river began to shift, its waters spilling into the pass. It wasn't a flood like in the old myths, but it was enough. Mud thickened, stones sank, and the narrow path became a quagmire. Cassian's scouts arrived at dawn, took one look, and turned back. The army couldn't cross not without risking wagons, horses, and men. Word came later that Cassian had moved on, seeking easier prey. The village was safe. For now, there was no feast, no parade, but there was relief, and something new, respect for Marcus. Not because he'd slain a dragon or shouted a speech, but because he'd stayed steady when everyone else was unraveling. The days after Cassian's retreat were quiet in the village, but quiet didn't mean peaceful. The river had saved them, but it had also changed things. Fields were waterlogged, tools were broken, and winter was creeping closer. Whispers started to spread, some grateful, others bitter. Marcus's plan worked, said one farmer, but now my crops are ruined. Another grumbled, if we'd fought, maybe we'd have glory instead of mud. Marcus heard it all. He was out there every morning, knee-deep in the fields, helping to clear debris and rebuild irrigation ditches. He didn't argue with the complaints or defend his choice. He just kept working. To him, the grumbling was like the wind loud, but not his to control. Marcus had been rereading Seneca's words, "You must endure what comes, and not be disturbed by it." That stuck with him. The village was safe. The rest? They'd figure it out, one shovel at a time. But not everyone saw it that way. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a man named Taurin confronted Marcus by the communal fire. Taurin was broad as an ox, with a voice to match. He'd been one of the loudest voices for fighting Cassian, and Marcus's plan had left him restless, like a dog chained too long. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Taurin said, his words cutting through the chatter. Heads turned, flooding the pass, saving us all, but look at us now, scraping mud, eating less. What kind of victory is this? Marcus was sitting on a log, sharpening a hoe. He didn't look up right away. He finished a stroke, set the blade down, and met Taurin's eyes. "It's not about victory," he said calmly. "It's about survival." Taurin scoffed. "Survival? That's a coward's word. A real man fights. A real man wins." The air grew heavy. The villagers watched, waiting for Marcus to snap back, to match Taurin's fire with his own. But Marcus didn't. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and said, "Fighting's easy when you're angry. Staying steady, that's harder." Taurin's face reddened. "You talk like you're above us. Like you've got some secret we don't." "No secret," Marcus said. "Just a choice. Yell at what's wrong, or fix what you can." The words weren't loud, but they hit like a hammer. Taurin opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't used to this, someone who didn't rise to his bait. He muttered something under his breath and stormed off, leaving the firelight flickering in his wake. Livia, who'd been watching from the shadows, stepped forward. "You got a way about you, Marcus," she said, her eyes sharp. But Taurin's not wrong to question. People need more than survival. They need hope. Marcus nodded. He didn't disagree. Hope wasn't a word Seneca or Epictetus used much, but Marcus felt it in his own quiet trust that doing the right thing, day after day, built something lasting. "Hope comes from action," he said, "not words." Livia smiled, like she knew something he didn't. "Then show them," she said, "not just with ditches, with something bigger." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Livia's words gnawed at him. He'd saved the village, but saving wasn't enough. People were tired, not just in their bodies but in their spirits. He thought of Marcus Aurelius, the emperor whose meditations he'd heard about from a traveling merchant. "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be," Aurelius wrote. Be one. Marcus didn't want to argue with Taurin or anyone else. He wanted to do something. The next morning, he went to the elders with an idea, not a grand speech. Just a suggestion. "The river's strong," he said. "We redirected it once. Why not use it again? Build a mill, grind grain faster, store more for winter. It won't fix everything, but it's a start." The elders hesitated. A mill was work they weren't sure they could afford. But Livia spoke up. "Let Marcus try. He's earned that much." So Marcus got to work. He didn't know much about mills, but he knew how to learn. He sketched plans in the dirt, talked to traders who'd seen mills in other towns, and spent hours studying the river's flow. The villagers watched, some curious, others skeptical. Taurin, predictably, had plenty to say. A mill? He'd sneer. What's next? A castle? Marcus didn't bite. He'd learned from Epictetus, if someone provokes you, it's not their words that upset you's your judgment of them. Torin's taunts were just noise. The mill was what mattered. Weeks passed. Marcus worked alongside anyone who'd join him, young boys eager to prove themselves. Old women who knew the river better than anyone. He listened to their ideas, adjusted his plans, and kept going even when the rains came and turned the ground to sludge. There were days when the whole thing felt impossible, when beams broke, or stones sank, or his own hands bled from hauling rope. But Marcus didn't despair. He'd think of Seneca, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. Every setback was just another shovel in the dirt. One day, as they were setting the millstone, Torin showed up. He didn't say much, just watched from a distance. Marcus noticed but didn't stop working. Later, when the others had gone to eat, Torin approached. "Why do you do it?" he asked, his voice low, almost grudging. "No one asked you to." Marcus wiped sweat from his brow. "Because I can," he said, "and because it's needed." Torin didn't reply, but he didn't leave either. The next day, he was there, hauling timber without a word. Marcus didn't make a fuss. He just handed Torin a mallet and showed him where to strike. By the time the mill was finished, it wasn't just a building, it was a symbol. The wheel turned, the grain ground, and the village had something new, not just food, but possibility. People started to talk differently. They argued less, worked more. Torin still grumbled now and then, but even he'd change. He didn't challenge Marcus anymore, not because he agreed with him, but because he'd seen what Marcus's way could do. One evening, as the mill's wheel creaked under a full moon, Livia found Marcus sitting by the river. "You've done it," she said, "not just the mill. You've given them hope." Marcus shrugged. "I just built what I could." Livia chuckled. "That's what makes it hope. Boy, it's not a speech, it's a choice." Marcus looked at the water, its surface catching the moonlight. He thought of Marcus Aurelius again. Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought. He'd held the mill in his mind, day after day, until it was real. Maybe that was the real strength, not the kind that shouted, but the kind that endured. But the story wasn't over. Word was spreading beyond the village about the mill, about the man who'd outsmarted a warlord with a river. And with word came trouble. A new thread was stirring, one that wouldn't be stopped by water or stone. Marcus didn't know it yet, but his silence would be tested again, in ways he couldn't imagine. Engaging tone tailored for the American market. The narrative will stay coherent with the previous segments, building on Marcus's quiet strength and setting up the climax. I'll pause again after this segment for your feedback before wrapping up the final part, including the channel outro. Winter settled over the valley like a heavy cloak. The mill turned steadily, its wheel cutting through the cold air, and the village had enough grain to last the season. For the first time in years, children laughed without hunger in their eyes, and the elders spoke of spring with cautious optimism. Marcus worked as he always did, quietly, steadily, fixing what broke and planning what came next. But beneath the calm, he felt a shift, like the moment before a storm when the air grows too still. Word of the village's mill had spread. Traders carried the story to distant towns. A nobody named Marcus had stopped a warlord with a river and built a mill from nothing. To some, it was a tale of cleverness. To others, it was a challenge. Power, Marcus was learning, didn't just attract gratitude, it attracted envy. One frosty morning, a stranger rode into the village. He was lean, with sharp eyes and a cloak too fine for a common traveler. His name was Varnus, a messenger for a merchant lord named Drusus, whose wealth came from controlling the trade routes through the valley. Drusus had heard of the mill, and he wanted rather. He wanted the village to bend to him because of it. Varnus didn't waste words. He stood in the village square, flanked by 2 armed men, and addressed the gathered crowd. "Drusus offers protection," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Your mill's drawn attention, bandits. Raiders, worse. Pledge your grain to Drusus, and his men will keep you safe. Refuse, and you're on your own." The villagers murmured. Protection sounded good, but Marcus caught the edge in Varnus's tone. This wasn't an offer, it was a demand. He stepped forward, Not to the front, but just close enough to be heard. We've managed so far, he said evenly. What does Drusus want for this protection? Varnus's eyes narrowed, sizing Marcus up. Half your grain, and your mill under his name. Half their grain? The crowd stirred, voices rising in protest. That was a death sentence for a village already stretched thin. Marcus stayed calm, his hands clasped behind his back. He thought of Epictetus. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Varnus's threat was real, but panic wouldn't solve it. Half's too much, Marcus said. We can trade some grain. Fairly, but the mill stays ours. Varnus smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Bold words for a farmer. Drusus doesn't negotiate with men who play at being heroes. I'm no hero, Marcus said, just a man who knows what's ours. The crowd went quiet. Even Torin, who'd been standing nearby, looked at Marcus with something like respect. Varnus didn't reply right away. He tilted his head, as if marking Marcus for later, then turned and left with his men. The message was clear. Drusus wouldn't let this go. That night, the village was restless. Families argued behind closed doors. Some wanted to give in, others to fight. Torin found Marcus by the mill, staring at the wheel as it churned. You've got nerve, Torin said, but nerve won't stop Drusus. He's got men, money, power. What do we have? Marcus didn't answer right away. He was thinking of Seneca again. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Drusus was a threat, but not a god. We have each other, Marcus said finally, and we have time to prepare. Torin snorted, but he didn't walk away. Prepare how? We're not soldiers. We don't need to be, Marcus said, we just need to be smart. Over the next week, Marcus worked with the villagers to fortify the valley. They didn't build walls or sharpen spears. That wasn't their way. Instead, they used what they had: the land, the river, their wits. Marcus organized lookouts to watch the roads, so Drusus's men couldn't catch them off guard. They hid grain in secret caches, ensuring they'd eat even if the mill was taken. And they strengthened the mill's foundation, making it harder to sabotage. Marcus didn't lead like a general. He didn't shout or demand loyalty. He explained, listened, and worked harder than anyone. When a young man named Cato worried they'd lose everything, Marcus said, you can't lose what you don't cling to. The mill's just a thing. We'll rebuild if we have to. It wasn't what Cato wanted to hear, but it steadied him. Marcus was teaching them to focus on what they could control: their effort, their unity, not the fear of what might come. Livia watched it all, her old eyes bright with something like pride. You're not just building defenses, she told Marcus one evening. You're building people. Marcus shrugged. I'm just doing what makes sense. But it wasn't that simple. Drusus didn't wait long. A week after Varnus's visit, a band of riders appeared at dawn, not an army, but enough to intimidate. They carried torches and rode straight for the mill. The village froze, some reaching for tools, others hiding. Marcus was already there, standing in front of the mill with a shovel in hand, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of who he was. The leader, a scarred man named Gavros, reined in his horse. Drusus gave you a chance, he said. Now it's simple. Hand over the mill, or we burn it. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd been reading Marcus Aurelius again, late at night by candlelight. If it's endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining. This moment was endurable. He just had to find the way through. Burning it won't get you grain, Marcus said, and it won't make Drusus richer. Let's talk instead. Gavros laughed, a harsh sound. Talk? You think words stop men like me? No, Marcus said, but reason might. You want grain? We'll trade enough to satisfy Drusus, not enough to starve us. Or you can burn the mill and explain to him why you came back empty-handed. The riders shifted, uncertain. Gavros's grin faded. Marcus's calm wasn't what he'd expected. He'd come for fear, for surrender. But Marcus offered neither. You've got till sunrise, Gavros snapped, then wheeled his horse and rode off. As the riders vanished, the villagers crowded around Marcus. What now? Cato asked, his voice trembling. They'll be back. They will, Marcus said, so we get ready. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He walked the village, checking the caches, the lookouts, the mill. He wasn't afraid, not exactly. Fear was there, but he didn't let it rule him. He thought of Epictetus, there is only one way to happiness. And that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. Drusus's men were beyond his control. His own choices weren't. By sunrise, the village was awake, tense but united. Marcus stood by the mill, Taurin at his side, Livia nearby. When Gavros returned, he brought more men, 20, maybe 30. They didn't charge, they waited, letting their numbers speak. Marcus stepped forward alone. What's it to be? He asked. Gavros dismounted, his hand on his sword. You're brave, I'll give you that, but bravery's nothing without power. Marcus met his gaze. Power's not in swords, it's in knowing what you stand for. For a moment, no one moved. Then Gavros laughed again, but it was different, less certain. Marcus's silence, his steady resolve, was doing something words never could. It was forcing Gavros to think. The morning sun broke over the valley, casting long shadows from the riders lined up before the mill. Gavros stood at their center, his sword still sheathed but his posture screaming impatience. The village held its breath, Taurin gripping a pitchfork, Livia watching with steady eyes, and Cato clutching a stone like it could protect him. Marcus stood alone in front of the mill, his shovel planted in the dirt, not as a threat but as a statement. He wasn't here to fight, he was here to stand. Gavros took a step forward. Time's up, he said. What's your answer, farmer? Marcus didn't rush to speak. He let the question hang, feeling the weight of every eye on him. He thought of Marcus Aurelius. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Gavros could burn the mill, take the grain, even hurt the village, but he couldn't take Marcus's choice to stay calm, to reason, to endure. We'll trade, Marcus said at last, his voice clear but quiet. A quarter of our grain, delivered each season, for peace. The mill stays ours. You tell Drusus it's a fair deal, better than ashes. Gavros's eyes narrowed. A quarter? You think you can dictate terms? I'm not dictating, Marcus said. I'm offering. You burn this mill, you get nothing. Drusus gets nothing. We all lose. Or we trade, and everyone walks away with something. The riders murmured, glancing at Gavros. Marcus's logic was simple, but it cut deep. Stoicism wasn't about grand gestures, it was about seeing things clearly, acting wisely, even when fear screamed to do otherwise. Gavros wasn't a philosopher, but he was a man who answered to someone else. And Marcus was betting he didn't want to return to Drusus empty-handed. For a long moment, no one spoke. The mill's wheel creaked, the river gurgled, and the village waited. Then Gavros laughed a short, grudging sound. You've got guts, he said. A quarter's not enough, but I'll take it to Drusus. Don't expect him to like it. Marcus nodded. Tell him we're ready to talk, not fight. Gavros mounted his horse, his men following. As they rode off, the village exhaled. Taurin lowered his pitchfork, shaking his head. You're mad, he said, but there was a grin in his voice. Mad, and maybe brilliant. Livia approached, her cane tapping the ground. You didn't just save the mill, she said. You showed them what strength looks like. Marcus shrugged, picking up his shovel. I just did what I could. But it was more than that. The village had seen it, Taurin, Cato, even the children hiding behind their mothers. Marcus hadn't raised a fist or shouted a speech. He'd stood his ground, not with anger but with reason, not with fear but with resolve. That was the Stoic way, strength without words, power in silence. Days turned to weeks. Drusus sent no reply, but no riders came either. The village kept its lookouts, its caches, its unity. The mill ground on, and with it, the people grew stronger, not just in their hands but in their hearts. Marcus worked alongside them, no different than before. He didn't seek praise, and when it came, he deflected it. It's not about me, he'd say, it's about us. One evening, as spring's first green touched the valley, Livia called Marcus to her hut. She handed him a tattered book, Seneca's Letters. Found this at the market, she said. Thought you'd want it. Marcus took it, his fingers tracing the worn cover. Thank you, he said, and meant it. The words inside weren't new to him, but they were true. The good things of life are not to be had by shouting for them. He'd lived that truth, and it had carried him through. As he walked home, the stars bright overhead, Marcus thought of the future. There'd be other threats, warlords, merchants, or just the grind of life itself. But he wasn't afraid. He'd learned what Epictetus taught. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. The village was his power. His choices were his power. And that was enough. The warrior's silence wasn't about being quiet. It was about being steady, about finding strength not in noise, but in clarity, in action, in the courage to keep going. Marcus wasn't a hero in the old tales. He was something better, a man who lived what he believed. And that's the story of Marcus, a reminder that real strength doesn't need a megaphone. It's in the choices we make every day, the way we stand tall when the world gets loud. Here at the Daily Stoic Mindset, we're all about bringing you stories like this, practical wisdom, Stoic lessons, and a little inspiration to keep you grounded. If you liked this tale, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join us for more. Next time, we'll dive into another story of resilience and reason. Until then, stay steady, and we'll see you soon.